We are now ready to begin construction on the Confident Cowl from Unleashed Patterns. For these steps, you'll need your front bodice, back bodice, and back facing. We're going to start with our back bodice and back facing. As a reminder, this bottom edge here of the back facing will be left raw, but if you want to finish it, go ahead and do so now before going on to the next steps. We're going to take our back facing and place it right sides together with the back bodice. We're just going to align these along the top curve here, which is also our back neckline. I'm going to take a few clips to hold these layers of fabric together before taking it over to my machine and sewing it with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you're using a fabric that doesn't have the best recovery and wanted to add clear elastic, do so at the same time when you're sewing your back neckline. Once we've sewn our back facing to the back bodice, we can set it aside for now. But I did want to point out that on the edges here, which is our shoulder seam, these two pieces will not align. Don't worry, I'll explain later why that's the case. So go ahead now and take your front bodice fabric, and we're going to lay it with the wrong side of the fabric facing up on our workspace. This top curve here is the self-facing of the front bodice, and it is also a raw edge that will also be left exposed. So if you wanted to finish it, do so now. If you'll notice on either side of our pattern here, we have these triangle cutouts. And from end to end, it's kind of our fold line. So we're going to take our fabric and fold it with the wrong sides together, making sure that we're folding it right in the middle at the top point of that triangle. We're going to repeat that on both sides. And again, this is a space where when we fold down the self-facing, it will not line up here on the edge, which is also our shoulder seam. If you want to, you can baste these two pieces of fabric together, but I'm just going to leave them clipped for now. We're going to reach over and grab our back bodice again. We want to have it face up on our workspace. And we're going to fold that back facing fabric up. So we're only looking at the right sides of the fabric right now. Then take your front bodice and place it with the right side of the fabric with the right side of the back bodice. I'm going to shift the fabric here so that we are only looking at one side. And we want to take where we have the fold on our front cowl and place it as close as we can to the fold line from our back facing and back bodice. I'm then going to fold the back facing down. So when you're looking at your fabric now, your front and back shoulders will match. Then you will have your front facing and then your back facing. The front facing and back facing will be shorter than the back shoulder seam and the front shoulder seam. So take another clip to hold those layers together, and we're going to repeat those steps on the other side. Taking the fold from the front cowl and placing it as close as possible to the seam line where we sewed the back facing and front facing together. Then fold the back facing down and then use pins or clips to hold those layers together. Now I'm going to take it over to my machine and sew on both sides with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, after we've sewn the shoulder seams, we're going to go ahead and turn our bodice fabric so that all of it is right sides out. And I'm going to hold it up by the shoulder seams. You can already see the drape of the front cowl here. If you wanted to, and some fabrics will benefit from it more so than others, you can either top stitch or understitch your back facing. In either case, if you're going to top stitch or understitch, make sure that you're starting or stopping at the shoulder seam and going all the way across to the other. You do not need to top stitch or understitch the front. So I've gone ahead and top stitched the back neckline, and I used a contrasting thread to give you a better visual of what I was referring to when I said to stop and start at the shoulder seam. And once we've done that, we're going to open up our bodice fabric so that it's flat, so that we can attach the sleeves. I'm going to use a clip here to mark the back bodice to make sure that we are attaching the sleeves correctly. And we're going to attach the first sleeve. Make sure that your fabrics are right sides together. So I also have a clip here marking the back of the sleeve. And I'm going to start by aligning them at the side seam. Do a couple there, and then I'll move to the opposite end and grab a couple more clips to hold the layers together. And if you want to work from one end all the way across to the other, by all means do so. I know everyone has their preferences for how they do their sleeves. I'm just going to continue to clip the layers of fabric together. But what I did want to show you as a reminder, the right side of the fabric that we're looking at here, that is from the front cowl, and it is shorter. And that is so that when we are attaching the sleeve to the front and back bodice, that cowl part does not get caught in the seam allowance. If it gets caught in the seam allowance, we risk it pulling the cowl off the shoulder every time you move your arm. So that's why I wanted to make sure that I showed you this part of the construction, or at least the assembly, and to show you why the front cowl pieces and the back cowl pieces are not the same length across the shoulder seam as the front and back bodices are. And again, it's just to make sure that the cowl and the facing are not caught in the seam allowance when you are attaching your sleeve. So now that we have these pieces all pinned together, I'll flip it over and show you the reverse side. So whenever you're sewing the pieces together, you have the right side of the fabric that we're looking at here is our front facing, and this is our back facing, and then we have our front and back bodices attached to the sleeve. So I'll go ahead and sew this together with my machine, and I'll be right back. All right, I have sewn the sleeve to the bodice, and here is a close-up of what it should look like at the shoulder seam. So here we've attached the sleeve, and again, the front self-facing from the front cowl just misses being caught in that seam allowance, which is what we want. And the back facing is completely out of the seam allowance. And again, it's okay if you get a little bit here, but you don't want to stretch or pull any more of that front cowl into the seam allowance when you attach the sleeve, so that your cowl isn't pulled off the shoulder every time you move.